Hi everyone, Dr. Mike here. In this video, I'm going to go through neuroanatomy. I'm going to take the brain out of Frank here and I'm going to label it for you and tell you some important functions of each part of the brain. First thing you can see is we've taken the skull off Frank, and we know that the skull is this cranial vault. It holds this gelatinous tissue that we call the brain inside, which has pretty much the consistency of oatmeal. So it really needs to be encased in this very tough bony tissue. But it's also covered by three meningeal layers that we call the dura mater, tough mother, arachnoid mater, spider mother, and pia mater, soft mother. And the soft mother, the pia mater, is actually this tissue, soft tissue paper-like substance that's attached to the brain itself. You can see the two hemispheres, and you can see that there's a fissure separating the two hemispheres. This is important because information coming to the left hemisphere needs to go to the right and vice versa. This is super important. I'll tell you the importance of that shortly. Now let's just take a single hemisphere of the brain out and let's just focus on this. Now it's a mirror image of the other side, so we can just look at this one side and go through some structures. First of all, you can see the cerebrum. The cerebrum is the largest portion of the brain itself, and you can see all the various blood supply, the vascularity associated with it. You can see the dip down. These dips are called sulci, or sulcus for singular, and gyrus, or gyri for plurals, gyrus for singular. These are the bump up. So bump up, gyrus, dip down, sulcus. This increases the surface area of the brain so that we can actually fit more tissue mass inside of that cranial vault so we can do more thinking, basically. Now, there's various lobes associated with the cerebrum. The outer 2 to 5 millimeters of the cerebrum we call our cortex. And you're going to have the frontal lobe, which is important for initiating motor movement. You're going to have the parietal lobe, which is important for understanding sensory information. The occipital lobe, picking up vision. And we're going to have the temporal lobe here, picking up sound. In addition to that, you can see this structure here, which we call the cerebellum. And the cerebellum literally means small brain, and there looks like this tree structure. This tree is called the arbor vitae, which means the tree of life. And the thing you need to understand about the cerebellum is it helps fine-tune motor movement. So anytime you need to maintain motor tone, motor coordination, and balance and posture, the cerebellum is going to be playing an important role. If the cerebellum is damaged, you can have something called cerebellar ataxia. Those things aren't being fine-tuned, so somebody may look like they're drunk. They may not even be able to walk on both legs. They may have to walk on all fours. And there's actually a genetic disorder in which people with cerebellar ataxia, genetic cause, need to walk on all fours because they can't maintain that balance. You can see this structure here going deeper. This is called the corpus callosum. This is white matter. And this corpus callosum connects one hemisphere of the brain to the other hemisphere of the brain. And you can see the other side here. And it's white matter track, so it's simply going back and forth, one hemisphere to the next. This is important because when information goes to one side of the brain, it needs to travel to the other side of the brain for processing, and vice versa. Some people back in the 60s and 70s had this corpus callosum cut, and that's called a corpus callosotomy. They had it cut because they had a very severe form of epilepsy that resulted in grand mal seizures. An epilepsy, or a seizure, is a misfiring of neurons, and it can go from one side of the brain to the other, right? And so cutting that corpus callosum limits the severity of those seizures, and it worked. But it also limited the way that the brain sent signals from one side to the other, and people had issues with their consciousness. It seemed to be that one side of the brain generated one form of consciousness and the other side generated another. So that's called the split brain experiment. I recommend that you Google that. All right, as we move down, some other important structures. This structure here, this white structure here, this is called the fornix, and the fornix is basically another white matter tract that sends signals to the hypothalamus and away, the hippocampus and away from the hippocampus. We know the hippocampus is important for memories and memory consolidation. So the fornix plays a really important role in memories, particularly episodic memories. If this fornix is damaged, individuals can have problems with episodic memory. And a good example of this is if you take somebody for a drive and you tell them to remember where you're going by remembering various structures and buildings and things like that, they're not going to be able to remember it. So that's the fornix there. Important role with the hippocampus. Next thing is this pink structure here. This is just basically the roof of the third ventricle. And that's important to point out because, well, we've got 4 ventricles, and the ventricles produce, through a certain type of cell called ependymal cells, produce cerebral spinal fluid, which floats around the brain itself, helps provide nutrients, take away wastes, and basically perform a whole bunch of other tasks. So just below the roof of this third ventricle, we have something called the thalamus. And the thalamus, I'm just going to get a pen. And the thalamus again, which is this structure here, that's the thalamus. The thalamus is the relay center for the brain. So any sensory information that's coming up, so we're going to have sensory information that's going to be coming up the brainstem. It's going to go to the thalamus, and then the thalamus decides what it wants to do. It's the sorting center. And it goes, okay, this is sensory information going to my arm, or coming from my arm. I need to send it to the part of the brain that needs to pick that up. Oh, this is a pain signal from my foot. I need to send that to an area that deals with the foot, and so forth. So that's the relay center. This mass here is a thalamic mass, or the intermediate mass, that just connects the 2 thalami of the 2 hemispheres together. So you can see that we're going to have the other thalamus in there. And it just connects those 2 up. All right, what else can we see? We can see the optic chiasm there. That's the optic chiasm. Your optic nerve comes in from each eyeball and it crosses over. And this crossing over happens here at the optic chiasm. So it's sending sensory visual information in to the brain. This is going to be the stalk of the pituitary gland. So you're going to have your pituitary gland sticking out here. Now what that means is that the pituitary gland is always connected to the hypothalamus. So the diencephalon is this structure here, right? So I said we've got the cerebellum, the diencephalon, and the diencephalon is the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and also, importantly, the pituitary gland, which is sitting at the back. I'll talk about that in a sec. But the hypothalamus, which is this structure here, hypothalamus is the master regulator of the endocrine system and the autonomic nervous system. So fight or flight, it controls that. The hormones of the body, it controls most of them. And it does it by sending signals from the hypothalamus down this stalk here to the pituitary gland, and you're going to have an anterior and posterior aspect, not here, and they release a whole range of hormones. Anterior pituitary gland releases hormones, stimulate the adrenal glands, thyroid gland, for example, growth hormone, whole bunch of hormones, and the posterior pituitary gland releases hormones that are important, like oxytocin and also antidiuretic hormone. When we look at the pineal gland, the pineal gland is important. It's, again, an endocrine gland. It releases a hormone, and this hormone is called melatonin, which is important for sleep-wake cycles. All right, what else can we see? We can see the brain stem here. The brain stem has the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla. Cumulatively, they're all really important for basic functions. So things that include breathing, so respiration, heart rate, for example. It's got a whole number of reflexes there. So reflexes that have to do with vision, or the eyeball, vision, reflexes that have to do with sneezing and coughing and all those types of things. So the brainstem, often referred to as the old part of our brain. It's phylogenetically old. So evolutionarily, yes, it's an old part of the brain. This is why some people call it the lizard brain. And there we go. That is a quick run through of the neuroanatomy of the brain. Hi everyone, Dr. Mike here. In this video, we're going to go through the 12 pairs of cranial nerves. Now remember, these are nerves that shoot out and away from the brain and brainstem, and they innervate the head and neck predominantly. Now what I've got here is my model. I've got some of the muscles, some of the bones, some of the nervous tissue. The yellow things that you see are the nerves, and most of these are the cranial nerves and their various branches, and it looks busy, but we're going to break it down one by one. Number 1 to number 12. Now when we look at number 1 to number 12, we know that it starts at the brain, moves down to the brainstem. So we've got the cerebrum here, which I'm isolating various aspects of it. Then I've got the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla, and these 3 aspects are part of the brain stem. Most of the cranial nerves are shooting out and away from these areas. So if we start, the first cranial nerve. So remember the mnemonic O, to touch and feel, very good, velvet, heaven. O. The first 3 begin with O. First of which is going to be olfactory. Olfactory means sense of smell, and that's what this nerve does. It's a sensory nerve, gives us our sense of smell. You can see the olfactory tract here, which is terminating at the olfactory bulb, and you can see the axons of the olfactory nerve right here. Now what these axons are doing is they are picking up, well, the various terminals of these axons are picking up odorants. So if we look down, you can see that you've got the opening cavities of the nares, of the nose. And so odorants will be moving up, and these are chemicals, and they are being picked up by the olfactory bulb and transmitting this signal down this olfactory nerve back to the brain so we can be aware of the fact we've smelt something. When you test the olfactory nerve, you don't use pungent smells, you use smells like coffee and flowers and more lighter smells. That's how we do it. You can't use toxic, strong smells like ammonia or chlorine, for example, because that may be picked up by other nerves. So that's the first, the olfactory. Now, if we look and we start to move down, right, the next one we're going to see is that is the optic chiasm, but the next is the optic nerve, number 2, second cranial nerve. Now, the optic nerve is another sensory nerve, gives us our sense of vision. You can see the optic nerve terminates here at the eyeball. So when light comes in, it's going to hit the optic nerve and it's going to travel back to the optic chiasm and then travel to various structures of the brain that help us understand what we have seen, particularly the occipital lobe, which is sitting at the back of the brain. That's really important as our primary visual cortex. So again, it allows for us to see things. This is the optic nerve. Now, when you test the optic nerve, you can test it by doing visual acuity, so how well you can see. You can do a pupillary reflex where you shine a light in, and the pupillary dilation or constriction response is actually piggybacking off the ocular motor, which is going to be the next nerve that we take a look at. So we just continue to move down. So we've got the next nerve here moving down, and you can see that this nerve is coming out at what looks like that junction between the midbrain and the pons. And this is that ocular motor nerve. And the ocular motor nerve is a motor nerve. So everything so far has been sensory, but this is motor. Now you can see where it's innervating. It's innervating this muscle, which is the inferior rectus. It's innervating this muscle here, which is the superior rectus. It's innervating this muscle here, which is the medial rectus. And it's innervating the inferior oblique muscle. But it's not innervating the lateral rectus, and it's not innervating the superior oblique. So what the oculomotor nerve does, it allows for us to move our eyes up and down and inwards, predominantly. Now, the thing is, none of these nerves work in isolation. So there's actually 3 nerves that help us move our eyes: the oculomotor nerve, the abducens, and the trochlea. So we need to think about them all together. So just remember at the moment, the oculomotor nerve is really important because it innervates superior rectus, inferior rectus, medial rectus, and the inferior oblique, but not the lateral. So it doesn't bring the eyes out to the side. That's going to be the abducens. And it doesn't innervate the superior oblique. That's going to be the trochlea. It also allows for us to have the ability to lift our eyes up. And so what we're going to find is that when we move down, so that means open our eyelids. When we move down from the oculomotor nerve and we go to the trochlear nerve, which is the 4th cranial nerve, you can see that the trochlear nerve is up, it's moving up here, and it is innervating that superior oblique. All right, really important, because if we continue to work our way through, so like I said, there's the trochlear nerve, we move down to the next nerve, which is cranial nerve 5. We're not at the abducens yet, so we need to look at cranial nerve 5, which is the trigeminal nerve. Big nerve that you can see here, trigeminal ganglia, so this is where the cell bodies sit, and there's 3 branches, that's why it's called trigeminal. The first branch is the ophthalmic, and it's going to send signals to the area of the eye. The maxillary, which is the top of the jaw, and the mandibular, which is the bottom of the jaw. So let's just have a look at that. So we've got the ophthalmic, and you can see it's going to that area that's innervating around the area of the eye. There's various branches of the ophthalmic that we can see here. Then we've got the maxillary, and you can see it's innervating down to the, if I zoom out, top of the jaw, and we can see that there, right? And we go down to the mandibular, and it might be hidden by the various musculature and bones, but you can see that there we go. The mandibular goes down to the bottom of the jaw. Now, what the trigeminal nerve does is it's both sensory and motor. So far, we've only spoken about either sensory or motor, trigeminals both. So these three branches give us sensation for our face. So around the area of the eye and forehead, around the area of the top of the jaw, and around the area of the bottom of the jaw. Now, it's this nerve that's responsible for ice cream headaches, because when you take in ice cream, it's cold and it's going to stimulate one of these branches, most likely the maxillary branch. But as it comes in, it piggybacks at this ganglia and it thinks it's coming from the ophthalmic branch, and it thinks that it's coming from the forehead. And so you get what feels like a particular headache. That's what's happening with ice cream headache. Now, the other thing is something called trigeminal neuralgia, where this aspect of the trigeminal nerve is actually being pushed upon most commonly by an artery. So if we add the arteries, you're going to freak out and you're going to see, whoa, there's a lot going on. Now, most commonly, if we zoom in, right, that's going to be that trigeminal nerve. If we have a look, there's an artery that's really close to it, and it's this artery right here, which is called the superior cerebellar artery. In around about 75% of arterial compression cases, this is what's responsible for trigeminal neuralgia, and it can be fixed. You go in and you can help move it away and remove that compression. So that's the trigeminal nerve. Now, I said that that's sensory, but it also plays a motor function. Now, what's the motor function when it comes to trigeminal nerve? It actually moves down and it innervates the jaw. So it allows for us to open and close our jaw. And some of the muscles associated with this, we can actually have a look at. Such as the medial pterygoid muscle. The medial and lateral pterygoid muscle, which is going to be innervated by the trigeminal, allows for us to open and close our jaw, and also move our jaw, pronate our jaw forward. Innervated by trigeminal. So we've done up to 5 so far. If we go down to the next nerve, which is going to be this one here, this is the abducens. This is the last nerve that helps move our eyes. And if we follow that nerve through, you can see it's here, right here, and that's innervating that lateral rectus. So what the abducens does is abduct. Abducens means abduct. Abduct means to take away. We're taking the eye away from the midline of the body. So again, we've got the oculomotor, the trochlear, and the abducens, and they all innervate these extrinsic muscles of the eye that we can see here. And a way to test it is doing the H movement with the finger, and you just follow that finger, and that's going to test all 3 of those nerves and the muscles they innervate. So we've done abducens now. You can see we're continually moving down. Now we're going to look at this complex here, and the first of which we're going to look at is not going to be vestibular cochlea, but it's going to be the next nerve after abducens. So we've got abducens there, and then we're going to have, if I can isolate, there we go, facial nerve. So the facial nerve is the 7th cranial nerve. It is also sensory and motor. And so the facial nerve has 5 particular branches. So we can see it moving here, moving down here, and it's got these various branches coming off. So let's have a look. We've got this facial nerve. We've got a branch up here called the temporal branch. So that's 1. We've got the zygomatic branch. That's 2. We've got the buccal branch. That's 3. We've got the marginal mandibular branch. That's 4. And we've got the, if I can isolate it, the cervical branch, which is 5. These are the 5 branches of the facial nerve. Now, what the facial nerve does, if I just pick it back up again, what the facial nerve does is allows for us to move our face. So it innervates those muscles of the face, and we can crinkle our forehead, we can move our cheeks, and so forth. So remember, trigeminal was sensation of the face, facial is movement of the face. But the other thing about the facial is it gives us our sense of taste on the anterior 2/3 of our tongue. That's facial. Taste, anterior 2/3. We can't see that here because I've removed the aspect of the tongue that gives us taste. All I've got is the muscle of the tongue called the genioglossus here, but we'll get back to that because we need to move the tongue at some point. So facial, both sensory and motor. Let's go back in. So there was facial, 7. Let's move to 8. And the 8th is vestibulocochlear. cochlea. Vestibulo means balance. Cochlea is the inner ear giving us our sense of hearing. You can see there's the two branches here. There's the cochlea and there's the vestibular. So again, it's allowing us to have balance and hearing, and you can test it simply by moving your fingers back and forth, rubbing them together next to the ears, and you should be able to hear the distance by which the sound is coming to and from, and also the location. So that is going to be the vestibulocochlear, which is the 8th cranial nerve. Now we need to look at the 9th cranial nerve, and that's the glossopharyngeal. Now, glosso means tongue, pharyngeal means pharynx. So what the glossopharyngeal does is it's both sensory and motor. Let's have a look. You can have a look at the glossopharyngeal. There's one of the ganglia of the glossopharyngeal there, and you can find the other, whoops, I can do that. You can find the other ganglia here, and you can see it moves down and down and down and down. And let's have a look at some of the branches of that glossopharyngeal. It's quite hidden, but down here. Now, what the glossopharyngeal does is it's going to innervate a muscle that's important for swallowing. Which is going to be this stylopharyngeus. The stylopharyngeus muscle is important when it comes to swallowing and opening up that pharynx. So that's what the glossopharyngeal does. That's the motor aspect. And the sensory aspect is it gives us our sense of taste on the posterior 1/3 of the tongue. Facial, anterior 2/3, glossopharyngeal, posterior 1/3. All right, let's continue moving through. Next is, so we were just there at 9, glossopharyngeal, now we're at number 10. Everyone's favorite, the vagus nerve. Now the vagus nerve is the wandering nerve. It's the only nerve of the 12 pairs that go beyond the head and neck. So we can keep following it here. There's a ganglion, there's another ganglion. Let's follow it down. And you can see a branch here, which is the superior laryngeal nerve. And we can keep going down. Now you can see branches off here. This is going to be part of the cardiac branch, so it's going to go to the heart, help slow that heart down, and continue with this vagus nerve. And if we were to just keep following, you can see it goes beyond the head and neck, unlike any of the other nerves do. And you can see it's still going down here, moving down, 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 down. Now, what this vagus nerve does, we're not going to follow it all the way, but the vagus nerve innervates the heart, innervates the airways, allows for us to swallow, innervates the digestive tract. It's a really important parasympathetic nerve, rest and digest. That's the vagus. That's number 10. Now let's look at 11 and 12. As we move in, we've got 11, which is the accessory nerve. This helps innervate nerves that allow for us to shrug. So the traps, for example, that's going to be important for the accessory nerve. So it's a motor nerve. And then the last nerve is going to be the hypoglossal nerve. And that's going to be this nerve right here. You can see at the anterior aspect of the pons there. At the anterior aspect of the medulla. And what it's doing is, hypo means below, glossal means tongue. If we were to follow it, we can sort of see it hidden there. There it is. Here's that nerve moving down there. Where is it going to? Let's keep following it. Where's it going? Where's it going? Aha! You can see its branches are terminating here onto this muscle. What is this muscle? This is the genioglossus. Let's zoom out. That is the muscle of the tongue. Allows for us to move our tongue. So the hypoglossal nerve allows for tongue movement. And this is a run through of the sensory, motor, and both aspects of the 12 pairs of cranial nerves. So now we're going to take a look at the varus spinal nerves. And you can see there are a lot to go through. Okay, so the yellow things are obviously the nerves. We're going to have a look at the nerves of the cervical area, the nerves of the thoracic area, the nerves of the lumbar, sacral, and coccygeal. Predominantly, we're going to be focusing on what we call the plexuses. Plexus, P-L-E-X-U-S, means abrading. And you can see that some of the nerves that come out and away from the spinal cord actually form these braided networks, and that's a plexus. So there's going to be a plexus of the cervical plexus. There's going to be a brachial plexus. there's going to be a lumbosacral plexus. They're going to be the focus of today's online lab. So what we're going to begin with is the cervical nerves, and we're going to have a look at some important clinical nerves that shoot out and away from here. So if I were to just highlight the cervical spine for a second and isolate, what you can see is that there's obviously going to be 8 cervical nerve pairs. So if we zoom in, you can see nerve 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So there's 8 cervical spinal nerves. And importantly, we're going to take a look at C1 to C4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So these ones here are what we call the cervical plexus. They form this braided network that you can see here. Now, importantly, the cervical plexus helps innervate the back of the head, neck, and shoulders, gives us that sensation and innervates a couple of important muscles as well. But importantly, what I want to highlight to you is this one nerve that tends to transcend all the way down to this area here. Now, this is known as the phrenic nerve. And if I were to move back a little bit and we were to have a look and add a few muscles and have a look at what that phrenic nerve innervates, you can see that the phrenic nerve is innervating this muscle here called the diaphragm. So the phrenic nerve helps us breathe because it innervates the diaphragm. Now let's go back and take a look at that phrenic nerve. And what we'll see is that the phrenic nerve arrives from C3, C4, C5. C3, 4, and 5. So C3, 4, 5 keeps you alive. That's what we say. That's how you remember where the phrenic nerve comes from. And it shoots out of the cervical plexus, which is C1 to C4. All right, now what I want to have a look at is the rest of the cervical nerves, particularly C5 down to T1, thoracic 1. So if we zoom in a little bit, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Now if we look at 5, 6, 7, 8, and then T1, what we're finding is that these form the brachial plexus. And here's the brachial plexus here. Again, if we look at C5, like we stated, C6, 7, 8, and then thoracic nerve 1. So the brachial plexus is important because it innervates the arm, so the upper arm, the lower arm, the wrist, and the hand and the digits. And you can see only a couple of branches here, so I think it would be best to just look at the entire upper limb to show you exactly how important it is. You can even see that outline of the hand there. It's beautiful. So what you need to know is that of this brachial plexus, which is obviously confusing, there's 5 branches. Now, these branches we can see up here. We can have a look at the 5 branches. So if you have a look from this angle, there's going to be some towards the front, some towards the back. So let's have a look. From superior to inferior, we've got the musculocutaneous. So we've got the musculocutaneous branch, the median nerve, the ulnar nerve, and then move to the back, the radial nerve, and the axillary nerve. So all of these nerves are innervating the arm. So you can see the axillary nerve here. It's obviously innervating the back of the arm here. It's going to be innervating certain muscles of the shoulder, particularly that of the scapula that are involved with the rotator cuff. You're going to have the musculocutaneous nerve, which travels down and is really important for the biceps and those elbow flexors. We've got the median nerve here, which you can see moves down, and that's important for wrist flexors, forearm flexors. We've got the ulnar nerve here, which you can see travels down behind the elbow here and goes to the forearm. And the radial nerve here, which is important because it goes towards the back and innervates the triceps. So these are the 5 nerve branches of the brachial plexus that you need to be aware of. Remember, the brachial plexus goes from C5 to T1. Now, as we look in, we're moving towards the thoracic area. We're going to have a look at the thoracic spine. There's no plexus for the thoracic spine. You can see there's no braidings. They stay as individual nerves. And this is important because what you're going to find is there's 12 pairs, right? So remember, there's 8 cervical nerve pairs. There's 12 thoracic nerve pairs. You can see them all here, starting at T1, going all the way down to T12. So T1 and T2, they're important. They innervate the top of the chest, and T1, we know, we just spoke about, is part of the brachial plexus. So that helps innervate the arm and hand, for example. T3, T4, and T5 here are important because they innervate the chest wall and they help us breathe, contract those internal and external intercostal muscles. T6, 7, and 8, they're important because they innervate the chest and they start to move down to the abdomen and help innervate the abdomen. And then 9, 10, 11, and 12, the last 4, they innervate the abdomen and then start to innervate the lower back. So these are the thoracic nerves. Then we move down to the lumbosacral plexus. Look at the mess down here. All right, so this is the lumbosacral plexus that we're going to have a look at. And let's isolate. And you can see the lumbosacral plexus starts to move down the leg. And you've got this massive nerve there that I'll highlight in a sec called the sciatic nerve. But a couple of things. When we look at the lumbosacral plexus, firstly, the lumbar plexus. That's L1 to L4. That's the lumbar plexus. Then we're going to have the sacral plexus. And the sacral plexus is L4 to around about S3, S4. That's the sacral plexus. So the important point for the lumbar plexus that you need to be aware of is that of the femoral nerve. And when we have a look at the femoral nerve, which is this nerve here that I've highlighted, the femoral nerve is really important because it gives us sensation at the front and sides of our thigh. And you can see that there. The front and sides of our thigh, mainly the front, and it innervates the pectineus, the sartorius, the rectus femoris, and the 3 vasti muscles. Now you're probably thinking, what are you talking about? Let's have a look at some of those muscles. Let's add the muscles in. So we're starting to add some muscles here, and you can see some of the muscles that I'm highlighting. These are deep muscles. We've got the iliacus, which is important, hip flexor and so forth. Let's add some more. So as we continue to add some more, you can see we've got the pectineus here. So this muscle, pectineus, innervated by that of the femoral nerve. Let's keep adding muscles. Now we start with one of the vastus here, vastus medialis. That's important. And then we start to add some more of these vasti muscles, vastus intermedius, vastus lateralis. All 3 of these are innervated by that femoral nerve. So you can see right at the front, it's innervated. And then we've got the important rectus femoris here as a knee flexor. Extensor, sorry. We've got that rectus femoris, super important, innervated again by the femoral nerve. So the femoral nerve is very important. Again, it comes out of the lumbar plexus, which is L1 to L4. But now we need to look at the sciatic nerve, which is this big one right here. Now the sciatic nerve, you can see as it transcends down, it innervates the back of the thigh and the arse, as we can see there. So if I add a few muscles, you can see as we get to the back, you can see it's behind those various vasti muscles, and then it starts to innervate the back. Perfect. All right, let's just take these muscles away and then have a look further down. You can see it starts to innervate the back of the leg as well. So importantly, the sciatic nerve pretty much allows for every muscle below the knee to work. That's the importance. Now you may think, wait a sec, if I highlight it, you've got the tibial nerve, that's a branch off it. You've got the common fibula, that's a branch. And you might be looking at this one over here and saying, that's not part of the sciatic nerve, and it's not. So the saphenous muscle, or the saphenous muscle, nerve, just gives sensation, that's all. It doesn't tell muscles to contract. So that's all going to be, importantly, the sciatic nerve, telling all these muscles to contract. And that comes from the sacral plexus, which is L4 to around about S3, S4. So this is, importantly, the nerves of the spinal cord. Again, you've got 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, and 5 sacral. And obviously the coccygeal we're not talking about because clinically they're not ones that we need to focus on, at least this trimester.